Good afternoon. I'm Galen Biker, president of Calvin College, and it's a joy for me to welcome you to the January Series 2011 of Calvin College. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones and pagers, and then please join me for an opening prayer. God of grace and God of wisdom, we thank you for the January Series and for the life and story of Temple Grandin. You have given us minds to know you, knowledge to use for your kingdom, and love to show your goodness. Teach us to live each day honoring you and respecting others in all that we do and say. Fill us with your grace and wisdom through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And now Tom Hoekstra, the professor of education at Calvin College, will introduce our guest.
Today's January Series speaker has been featured nationally and internationally in both print and broadcast media. She was recognized in 2010 as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. And last August, an HBO movie about her life won 5 Academy Awards, on her birthday, no less. 2010 was quite a year. If you Google Temple Grandin, you'll discover that she has not one but 2 websites. One reveals her extensive work in animal science, a field in which she holds a master's degree from Arizona State University and a PhD from the University of Illinois. She is now a professor of animal science at Colorado State University and is widely recognized as one of the world's leading experts on the humane treatment of cattle. Dr. Grandin's second website reveals another area of expertise and passion: understanding diverse minds. Not only does she understand differences in the ways people think, but she wants us to celebrate those differences. As a person who lives on the autism spectrum, Dr. Grandin is uniquely positioned to voice what neurodiversity is like from the inside out. While we're used to seeing ramps into buildings, Dr. Grandin is going to build some ramps that give neurotypical people access to different ways of seeing and thinking. Calvin College is grateful to William and Elaine Staub for underwriting today's lecture. Join them and me in welcoming with delight Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, it's great to be here today. I want to talk about a lot of different things today. I'm going to talk some about autism, some about animal behavior, but also some about sensory-based thinking and exactly what that is, and how different kinds of minds can work together. You know, if you want to understand an animal, you've got to get away from language. Now, I'm a total visual thinker. I think totally in pictures. And if you saw the HBO movie, there's a scene in there where the word shoe is said, and a bunch of shoes just come up like this, and they're all specific shoes. See, in my mind, there's no general image of a shoe. There's only specific ones. You know, and then an old Ked high top came up, 1950s, because, remember 1950s kind of memories. It's sensory-based. You gotta imagine a world where you don't have language. See, for me, language narrates the pictures in my mind. And somebody asks me a key word, it's sort of like, asking Google something. I start to see pictures. And this morning, one of the students asked me country. And I saw this roll-down map I had in the 3rd grade classroom. I saw a wooden puzzle that I had that was the United States. But then I started seeing snippets of different countries I had visited. Like I went to England, and there was a teapot with a cozy. I went to Sweden, they had a really nice daycare center. I went to Australia, and I went and saw a beef feedlot. And I could just stay in one of the countries, and then I could just get the Australia pictures. It's also associative. It's not linear. So how do I get from country to teapots? Well, because the teapot was associated with the country. You see, it's associative. And an animal's world is sensory: sound, taste, touch. And they have super good memories. Something bad happens to an animal, they remember. They remember bad things. They'll remember either a sound or a sight, something they were seeing or hearing right at the moment the bad thing happened. Like I knew an animal that was scared to death of diesel-powered equipment. In fact, it was an elephant. He was terrified of anything that ran with a diesel engine. If it had a gasoline engine, that was fine. Somewhere in his life, somebody probably tried to attack him with a front-end loader. So diesel engines were bad things. Here's another evidence that, that there's a lot of things going on that are non-language. Some statisticians got a hold of Van Gogh's Starry Night picture and did mathematical calculations on the swirls, and it fit a statistical model of turbulence. Now, I don't think Van Gogh knows anything about statistics, but that kind of mathematical, that pattern thinking was there. There's a type of Alzheimer's where the person will lose a language area of the brain, and then art ability comes out. This painting was done by a patient that lost the language parts of the brain and started doing fine arts, maybe for 4 or 5 years, and then eventually everything got wrecked. So this is another indicator that there's a world of visual thinking, mathematical thinking, that's sort of underneath language. It's where a lot of creativity is. Now, the autistic mind tends to be into details. See, the normal human being's mind tends to drop out the details, but the autistic goes into the details. And this is a test for looking at sort of gestalt thinking versus detailed thinking. And you got a whole lot of little letters there that make up a big letter. So if you say to the person on the autism spectrum, pick out the little ones, he's going to pick out the little ones a whole lot faster than picking out the big ones. And I was slightly faster on the little ones. And I find in working with a lot of people that think in words, they always want to ask abstract, kind of vague questions. I do a lot of work in animal welfare on writing up guidelines, how to handle cattle correctly. I developed an auditing system that the McDonald's Corporation and Wendy's and Burger King use to measure how cattle are handled at slaughter plants. And people will tend to write stuff, will handle them properly, or give them enough space. What does that mean? That's too vague. I don't know, it wouldn't be very good if the speed limit sign said, drive at the proper speed. And then you're out there in a fight with the policeman over what the proper speed is. No, the speed limit's posted. It's got to be clear. It's one of the reasons why traffic laws work really pretty well. Well, there was some brain scan research that showed that the normal mind drops out the details. And what was done in this study was they had people with autism, people with Asperger's, which is just mild autism, and normal people get in the brain scanner, and they had them read some sentences out of a book. And the autistic just picks up the detail of the words. And the Asperger got both sort of the overall semantics and the details, but the normal person dropped out the details. Well, the thing is, if you're building a bridge, details are really, really important. Because if you don't look at all the details, like how big the bolts are, for example, it just might fall down. Now, some of the first work that I did with livestock was to find things in the environment that scared the cattle that other people didn't notice. For example, at the entrance to this cattle veterinary facility, you got a flag there waving. This particular feed yard thought they'd have to tear down the whole entire facility. No, what they needed to do was move the flag. It's right there. But they just weren't seeing it. They thought rip down the facility first. And I teach a class in livestock handling and behavior. And one of the things I want to teach my students is how to be more observant. Because sometimes it's the little things that really matter. Here's an animal walking out of the chute, and notice how his eyes and ears are pointed right at that streak of sunlight. They'll show you the things that they're kind of scared of. You know, their brains are attracted to something that looks different. But I'm trying to get the animal to go up the chute, he's not going to want to walk over that bright streak of sunlight. And I've done a lot of work with the big slaughter plants, and people go, oh, they gotta know they're going to get slaughtered. Well, the thing that I found is if I get rid of the distractions, like a chain hanging down, a coat on a fence, a reflection on the floor, they walk right in. They weren't afraid of getting slaughtered, they were afraid of seeing the vehicles go by, or seeing the person up ahead. And you just had to observe and see what was bothering them. Get down in there and see what the animals see. And when I first started doing this in the 70s, this was really radical stuff. You know, now it's mainstream. And about 15 years ago, I did a study that showed that, that animals that get all scared and excited in the squeeze chute have lower weight gains. That was real radical stuff when that first came out. My student, Bridget Voisinay, did that study. Now it's been replicated a whole bunch of times. Sometimes things that are really new ideas are relatively simple. It was also a study that didn't cost anything. We just piggybacked onto an existing feed trial because we had individual weights on all the cattle, and we just rated which ones were calm and which ones were excited. Now notice on a sunny day, you're going to have a whole lot of stripes there and shadows. Cloudy day, you're not going to have shadows. You know, so one day it's working well, another day it's not working. It depends upon whether it's cloudy. Watch where the ears are pointing. The horse and the zebra have got an ear on each other, and the other ear's on me. You know, just watch. What's the animal doing? Watch the details. Now this is a picture that a young man sent to me to show how he has movies inside his head. This is how visual thinking works. It's literally pictures inside your head. And I used to think that everybody thought in pictures. I didn't know that my thinking was different until I wrote my book, Thinking in Pictures, and I started asking people, how do you think? And I was really shocked to find out that a lot of people think differently than I think. And the thing is, all of these pictures are specific. I realized my thinking was different when I asked people to think about a church steeple. And I was shocked to find out that most people see this generalized, vague church steeple. And what's been learned now in brain research, and this wasn't known back when I wrote Thinking in Pictures in the mid-90s, was that this is coming out of the association cortex of the brain, where the specific ones that I see are coming out of sort of the primary picture files. See, everything that I conceptualize has to be made out of specific examples. So, okay, I see just specific ones, and they kind of just flash up as pictures, just like that, just like it showed in the movies. They just come up as pictures. So my concept of what a steeple is based on a whole bunch of individual different church steeples I've seen. Now, why did I pick out church steeples is the thing to ask about? Because most people, even if they're a verbal thinker, can visualize their own dog or their own house. So I deliberately avoided those things. I have found a few people that drive cars that are not blind that if I ask them, visualize your home right now, they're not able to visualize going in their own front door. But that's rare. You know, you don't find very many of those. But you see, I picked out an object that's out there in the environment you have to see them, but you don't pay that much attention to them. You know, now if I ask factory, I've also used that for question, and sometimes they don't like to give the vague thing, you know, that's shaped like this. But then if they work in a factory, they're going to be really familiar with it, and they're going to see it. There's just another one there. But autistic thinking is what's called bottom-up thinking. To make a concept, I got to take specific examples and put it into a file folder in my brain. Now, being a visual thinker helped me in my work in designing livestock facilities because I could test run equipment in my mind, like a virtual reality computer system. I had virtual reality before virtual reality was invented. And I could look at a drawing and visualize walking through the facility. I thought everybody could do that. In fact, I got in some fights with some engineers because I said, how could that engineer be so stupid? Couldn't he tell that it just wasn't going to work, you know, by looking at the drawings? You might wonder, why is this curved? Because as the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. This happens to be at a large plant out west, and they just come on around the bend, and then they run right up the chute because they think they're going back to the stockyards. They have a tendency to want to go back to where they're coming from. It's using behavior to help move the animals. And there's an aerial view of the dip vat facility they recreated for the movie. One thing that really made me happy in the movie is they recreated all my projects just absolutely accurately. Claire Danes became me. They show the visual thinking accurately, they show sensory stuff accurately, anxiety, and all the things that I made. And now there were some things they fictionalized, but the stuff that's clinically important is accurate. We were very careful about that, right down to the flashcards that were shown and some of the teaching aids that are shown are accurate. And it was just really weird to go on the movie set, and it was like going back in the 70s, because this is a real dip vat. This wasn't just a prop. They actually built the real thing. It was just like going back to an equipment startup. Now, when I was young in my early 20s, I was really weird, and nobody wanted to talk to me. I remember going to the American Society for Agricultural Engineering meeting. This is my first professional meeting to present a paper. It was in 1974 in Chicago, and people thought it was really weird. But when I whipped out my drawings and I showed them my drawings, they go, "Ooh, you did that?" So to make up for social awkwardness, I had to sell my work and not myself. Now, a common question I get asked today is autism just increased diagnosis? Because autism is going all the way from Einstein and Silicon Valley geniuses and musicians and artists all the way down to somebody who's going to be nonverbal. There's no black and white dividing line between geek and nerd. And the kind of Asperger people, they've always been here. Always have been here. You know, I've worked with them in the maintenance shops of the different meat plants. I mean, they're the weird guy with the ponytail, and he keeps the plant running, and he's managed to survive 3 plant owners because he knows to stay out in the shop and don't fight with the suits. He just knows better. And some of the things I think that helped some of those people was the 50s upbringing. Man, you were taught table manners. You were taught being on time. You were taught to say please and thank you. And I think today's looser society doesn't help the people with Asperger's, because the problem is when you're on the autism spectrum, you got to learn all social rules like being in a play. You know, I got to just learn them like being in a play. Well, in the 50s, they did a really good job teaching you how to be in the play. And there's the dip fat drawings. They used that to recreate the dip fat for the movie, but that originally was built at John Wayne's feed yard out in Arizona, Red River Cattle Company. Now in my class, I actually have my students design livestock handling facilities. And for a lot of the students, this is really a new thing. They've got to learn how to do a drawing. And this brings up another thing. I'm really appalled at how they've taken so many of the hands-on classes out of the schools, because I was saved with art and sewing and wood shop and riding horses, and hadn't had those things, I would have gotten nowhere. Also, my science teacher was very, very crucial in getting me motivated to study. But, you know, you got kids growing up today that don't play outside, you know, where they do the games, so they make up their own rules. And the thing is, hands-on classes teach valuable problem-solving skills. Also, you know, things don't always work out right. I remember when we were kids, we were building a tree house. I was probably in like 5th grade. And we thought the lumber would be easy to cut if we watered it with a lawn sprinkler first. And I can assure you, it made it a whole lot harder to cut the handsaw. That was not the thing to do. So my students have to, you know, learn how to do these designs, and then I give them a drawing from an existing ranch. And I can guarantee you the drawings that are in the book are not going to fit on this drawing. So they got to follow certain rules. But the first thing you got to learn is how the drawing relates to the actual thing. And this is something that took me some time to learn. There's the actual structure, and there's the drawing. And what I did is I got the blueprints for the entire Swift meatpacking plant. In the movie, they changed it to Abbott because Swift's still a real brand, so they couldn't use the real name of Swift, but it was the Swift plant. And I got their blueprints. It had the parking lot. It had the cattle buying office. It had the water tower. It had everything on it. And I walked through the plant with that drawing until I could relate every single line on that drawing to a real thing, like a round circle's a water tower, a little tiny square was a concrete column that held up the building, this oval thing is a thing they put the hides in, you know, the little lines like this were the parking lot lines, you know, this little line around here was the fence, you know, everything be related back to the real drawing. And that's something you've got to learn how to do. And I found that how I have my students just take the drawing and walk around in the facility. They've got to learn, then they start to see how the drawing relates to the actual thing. Now, I've noticed some interesting things as design has gone into the computer age. And everybody switched from drawing by hand to drawing on the computer. Now, when the old folks switched over to the computer, the drawings were fine, no problems. But I noticed with some young people that have never built anything by hand and they've never drawn by hand, make weird mistakes on drawings. And I have drawings with these mistakes. Every single major meat company, I got a sample of these mistakes. And one of them is that the radius of the circle, the center of the circle is not in the middle of the circle for the round crowd pen. One pig stockyard had 25-foot long gates. How are you going to make 25-foot long gates work in a pig stockyard? See, the problem is they're not seeing it. They wouldn't actually take the compass function in the computer and swing the gates to see if they work, see if they latch in the right places. In fact, I don't think some of them even know it has a compass function. And then Mark, who's doing all my CAD drafting now, when he went to school and learned CAD drafting, they taught him all these keyboard commands, but they didn't even teach him the old drawing commands that are in the computer. Now, he swings all his gates. And I'm seeing a lot of these drawings that are made by people that haven't built anything. They leave out a lot of detail. I've also talked to some of the companies that do the animation, and they found that that they have to sometimes get them away from the computers and have them draw some hand drawings because they don't see it. See, until they get a device in the computer where you can feel all the things you've drawn, you're going to have to be doing the hands-on stuff because the mouse just isn't connected to the brain the same way the hands are. Okay, this is a picture that a young 9-year-old drew in perspective. You know, most kids don't draw in perspective. You know, around 3rd or 4th grade, you know, some skills may show up. See, the thing about people on the spectrum is they tend to be good at one thing and bad at something else. And we got to work on building up that area of strength into something that they can do when they grow up. And when I was a little kid, I was very good at drawing horses. But I wasn't allowed to just draw horses all the time. I was encouraged to draw a whole lot of other things so that, you know, broaden out my interest. Or the kid might get fixated on dinosaurs, or he might like trains. Well, then let's do a picture of the station. Let's do a picture of some places where you might take a train to. In other words, make an associative link back to that thing that he's really interested in. Now, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet trunk line deep into my visual cortex, and this is tensor imaging. It turns out that I do have a giant internet trunk line back into the visual cortex. And then another brain scan done at the University of Utah showed that my entorhinal cortex is really big. That's sort of a graphics card thing in the brain. And so I've got the internet cable and the graphics card to go along with it. That was a real mind blower. Okay, and you take a slice up here. I've got a huge one there on the right-hand side. Now, I'm a visual thinker, and I think in photorealistic pictures. You know, but there's another kind of mind that's a different kind of visual thinker. That's a more abstract visual thinker, the pattern thinking mind. And I want to emphasize that this doesn't just apply to autism and Asperger's. It can apply to other kinds of students too. But this praying mantis is extreme origami, and he's made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cutting, no Scotch tape. And what you see in the background is the folding pattern for making the praying mantis. Now, this is not my kind of mind. This is the mathematician mind. And this little kid that has this kind of mind may have some problems with reading. This is a really important slide, because I have found that there's some different kinds of thinking. There's the photorealistic visual thinkers. I don't want to emphasize this isn't necessarily just an autism. Absolutely cannot do algebra, because in algebra it's more verbal-like. And there's no pictures. And some of the kids that can't do algebra can do geometry and trig. And they need to be allowed to do the geometry and the trig. I never got an opportunity to even try geometry and trig. They pounded away on algebra. And then there's the pattern thinkers. These are the music and math minds. These are the guys that are going to be the engineers, the computer programmers. These kids might need some special education in reading. And then you've got verbal minds that can't draw. And then you've got some people that are strictly an auditory thinker that are also poor at drawing. And let's start thinking about jobs. We're not doing enough working on career preparation. I'm seeing smart guys graduating from college that can't get and keep employment. And part of the problem is they do stupid things like not show up for work on time or tell a boss off. I mean, stuff that I learned not to do. But the photorealistic thinkers, they'd be good graphic designers, good animators, architects. What I do with cattle equipment is actually called industrial design. You see, when you design a product, and I actually did read about the history of how a little iPod music player got designed, a fine arts major figured out that thing where you twirl your finger around on it. And then the engineers had to figure out how to make the insides work. So the engineers worked together with the industrial designer to make that product. Pattern thinkers, they're your engineers, your computer scientists, verbal thinkers are good at written word. We got to start thinking about what can they do when they grow up. Kids also need to be learning work skills. And while I was goofing around in high school and I wasn't studying, I was taking care of 9 horses. I was building things. I was learning how to do projects that other people would want and appreciate. Getting back to how I think, this little boy then sent me another picture showing how he's sorting dogs and cats into little boxes in his head. Because remember, to form a concept, I have to make it out of specific examples. So to understand what a dog or a cat is, I sort the dogs in one box and sort the cats in the other box. There's actually brain research now that shows that the brain can actually set up file folders. Well, when I was little, I sorted dogs and cats by size. Well, that worked fine until our neighbor's got a dachshund. And the dachshund's the same size as a cat, and had to figure out why this little tiny dog was not a cat. And I remember studying the dachshund, and I finally realized she had the same nose shape as a Labrador Retriever and a Golden Retriever. So I had to find a new visual feature that would be the same for everything I put in the dog file. Now, of course, I didn't know about wolves and coyotes. I can put them in there, too. I didn't know that bears have the same kind of nose. That would be a problem. But at least as far as my neighborhood was concerned, this worked. Now, another way I could sort them would be barking or meowing. You see, that's auditory. See, remember, it's sensory-based, putting information into categories. Or I could do it by smell. Dogs and cats have a different smell. Now, an example of categories in the animal's brain is on the leash and off the leash. The dog treats that as 2 different things. Maybe when I'm on the leash, I have to protect the owner. When I'm off the leash, I can go play. If you have a service dog, when the vest is on, you work. So don't play games with your service dog with the vest on. Take it off. He's got to learn that when the vest is on, it's work. Same thing with a guide dog. When that harness is on, it's work. It's only play when it's off. And you don't want to be confusing the dog. Cattle and horses have categories too. A man on the back of the horse is a different file folder in the brain than a man on the ground. So you can have a situation where you might have a horse that's easy to ride, but he's impossible to shoe and do veterinary work because he had some previous history by being abused by somebody on the ground. Cattle are the same way. You can have cattle that are like tame pets when they are handled by a man on a horse. But get on the ground, they scatter. You see, because it's a different picture. They haven't been trained to the man on the ground. See, it's much more specific. And I find that one of the things, as I mentioned before about writing these animal welfare guidelines, I have the hardest time getting people to be specific. They keep wanting to say, do it properly. Well, then what happens when laws are written that way, then the courts argue over they argue over what proper means. If the legislation had been written correctly to begin with, we wouldn't be arguing over it. It's bottom up and not top down. Animals are bottom up thinkers. People on the spectrum are bottom up thinkers. It's taking the details and putting them together into categories. So it's really important to get kids on the spectrum out doing things. Originally, I was afraid to go out to my aunt's ranch, but Mother made me go. She said I had a choice, 1 week or all summer. Well, I decided to stay there all summer. But I was, originally, I was kind of afraid to go. I had to learn everything, every concept by putting specific examples in different file folders. It's categories. Learning how to do categories. We used to play a lot of that game, 20 questions, and that game really, really helped me out. It's, because you can have, let's say, a hat. That hat could be worn at work, or that hat could be worn while you're doing recreation. Or if I have a toolbox, is that for play or is that for work? Well, it depends what's in it. Tools or fishing tackle. That's how categories can be different. When we'd play that game, you'd ask, is it animal, plant, or mineral? And then you'd have 20 questions to figure out what the other person was thinking about. Teach concepts with specific examples. Let's take up. walk up the stairs, I go up a hill, I go up in the attic, I lift up a cup, a kite's up in the air. I got to show that up applies to a whole lot of different things. If you want to teach the kid with autism not to run across the street, you better teach it at home, at church, at Granny's, at the Joneses, at the library. Because if you don't teach it in a whole lot of specific places, he might think it only applies at home. But you teach it in maybe 10 or 15 different places, then he's going to understand that it will start to generalize. Same thing with teaching math. If you just teach math counting little objects, he won't know that math applies to many different things. I can count candies, count pencils, count pens, count bottle caps. If I have 5 pieces of candy and I eat 2, I've got 3 left. That's subtraction. You know, keep applying it in the real world, learning less and more. 1 cup is half full, the other cup is all the way full. I can have more water in this bottle than in that bottle. You know, teach fractions by cutting up a pie, cutting up a pizza. You know, just when you have a pizza, just use that as a time to teach some fractions. Now, getting back to this horse that was afraid of black hats, he'd been abused by a person that was wearing a black hat. So anyone came near him wearing a black cowboy hat, he'd try to rear up and get away. White cowboy hats were fine. Now, when I put the hat down on the ground, it was less scary. But think about it. On the ground, it's a slightly different picture. But then as I took the hat and I raised it up closer and closer and closer to my head, it got more and more and more scary. In fact, there's no way we could have got him that near that hat if it had been on somebody's head. Now, I'm just kicking myself that I didn't try this big black purse that I had, because I think that might have caused some problems. Because the images can generalize in kind of a specific way. Like a horse that was afraid of broom handles would also be afraid of umbrellas and microphone stands and other long, straight objects. One of the things we got to do is get the different kinds of minds to work together. It's like I talked about the iPod designer working with the engineer. And I'm getting very worried today that a lot of these quirky kids, there's a lot of boys that aren't going to college now. What's happening to them? I think what's happening is you no longer have that auto shop teacher. There was a guy that got that kid turned around. You know, I think taking out the hands-on classes, I think is a huge, 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 gigantic mistake. I mean, I would have, just fallen apart in school if I hadn't had those classes. And we got to think about different minds and how we can, how they can complement each other. And we got to help students have different minds to be successful. One of the things that really helped me was mentors. My science teacher, he was shown just beautifully in the movie. He got an honorary doctorate for the movie. He was a NASA space scientist, that was true. And what he did for me is, I didn't care about studying. I didn't see any reason why to study all these subjects like English and history that I wasn't interested in. Well, he convinced me that if I want to become a scientist, then I'm going to have to study some things I'm not interested in. So just one day, I just switched around and I started applying myself in senior year in high school. And then I went to Franklin Pierce College, a small college that was just starting up in New England at the time, and they took me in on probation. This again was getting in the back door. I think it's really good that a lot of colleges now are, you've got a lot of programs here for different disabilities. And I'm appalled that a lot of these specialized teachers are no longer in the high schools. Where are the Mr. Carlocks now? They're at the community college. Because to teach science or teach chemistry or some other subject like that at the community college, you don't have to have a teaching certificate. But you got to have that in a lot of states to teach high school chemistry, which I think is ridiculous. Because there's a vast pool of people retiring that would love to just teach a high school science course or a high school English course. Now, I think, yes, they have to have a degree in the area that they're teaching. But, some of these teachers could be really important mentors. Get kids turned around, get them headed towards a goal. Well, we already talked about taking on out the hands-on classes. And I originally talked on this subject out at the TED conference, and half of Silicon Valley has got a little bit of Asperger's. The thing about the autistic Asperger mind is it's not very social. You know, socially awkward. There was a brain scan done on me that showed I was more interested in looking at things than at looking at pictures of people. But the thing is, we need to have some people in the world that are interested in things, because we wouldn't have any lights in this building if it wasn't for Tesla, who would definitely be diagnosed as autistic today, who invented the electric power plant. You know, there's all kind, you know, who do you think made the first stone spear? It certainly wasn't the social yakety-yaks around a campfire, that's for sure. Now, these are just some pictures that I got out of my photo album showing all the hands-on things that I did when I was in high school. I want to talk now about some of the problems that people have with sensory issues. And this applies to more than just to autism. You know, you can have dyslexia, learning problems, people with ADHD. You know, then you got labels like oppositional defiant. I have difficulties thinking of that as a medical diagnosis. I'm just trained too much as a hardcore biologist by that. I think autism's a real thing and dyslexia is a real thing. Oppositional defiant, I think, is a student that hasn't been mentored, causes that kind of problems. But there's a lot of different problems you can get with the brain where you get sensory issues. Sound sensitivity, touch sensitivity, visual sensitivity problems, and these things can be very, very debilitating. I had a dyslexic student that absolutely couldn't tolerate fluorescent lights. I mean, she felt like she was in a discotheque. She could see them flickering on and off. It was just dreadful. And then sound sensitivity. I just was given a book to look at this morning on how to get people on the autism spectrum, you know, involved in church. Well, one of the big problems is going to be sound sensitivity. If it's an electronic, blasted out rock and roll church, that's not going to work for some of them. Just not going to work. There are certain individuals where you can't take them into the supermarket without a screaming fit. If there's one area where we need a lot of research, it's how to treat and deal with these sensory issues. How can you be social if you can't stand going into the restaurant that's got 10 TVs going on at once in there? There's no way you're going to be social because you can't tolerate the environment. It's just that simple. Now, the thing about sensory issues is they're very, very variable. One child will maybe have hearing sensitivity that's just a nuisance. Another child is really debilitating. Another child might have problems with fluorescent lights, and another one doesn't. It's very variable as to which sense gets affected and how debilitating it is. But sometimes it's very debilitating. And I know people that are brilliant computer programmers that work in a darkened room because they just can't stand too much light. Another problem that brains with problems have, you know, when there's something wrong with the brain, is attention shifting slowness. Like if a cell phone goes off over here, I pay attention to that cell phone, and it takes me much longer to shift my attention back. There's going to be problems with multitasking. There's a lot of entry-level jobs I would not have been able to do. You know, answer phones and try to type at the same time, that's not going to work. Cashier in a busy restaurant with an old-fashioned cash register, that's not going to work. I can handle the Walmart cash register, but if it gets any more complicated than that, I'm not going to be able to handle it. And a lot of entry-level jobs require a lot of multitasking. But you see, doing design work, there's no multitasking. I go into the conference room, I sit down with the client, talk about what they want, we go out and tour the site, and then I go home and I design the job by myself. But then I had to learn how to work with the contractors and all the people that would actually build the things. And I had some social problems. One of my very first jobs, I criticized some welding in a not very tactful way. I said it looked like pigeon doo-doo. And that is not how to win friends and influence people. But fortunately, the engineer on that job, he was a guy my age, he pulled me into his office and he says, you got to go up and apologize to the welder because that was just really tactless. Now, I didn't go up and tell him his welding was wonderful because it wasn't. But I just went up there and I told him that what I had said was really rude and I apologized for it. And I never did that again. Now, there's some people, when they go to read, now I don't have this problem, because I wouldn't be a visual thinker if I had this problem. When they go to read, the print will jiggle on the page, especially when it's white paper with black printing. And this can sometimes be helped by wearing colored lenses, or maybe printing the homework on pastel paper. And my dyslexic student was helped greatly by the colored lenses, by the Erlen colored lenses. And I've sent a lot of students out shopping at the local sunglass store because I'm finding in my drawing class, out of 60 students every semester, I'm getting 2 that have this problem. They absolutely cannot draw. If I ask them to make a line like this, and I want 3 half circles on the line like that, this doesn't have anything to do with knowing about cattle at this point, they can't do it. It's just all over everywhere. Okay, and they're looking at the drawing of the single file chute, 2 lines, kind of parallel going around the circle, and they go, I see the waves in between the lines. And there's something wrong with the circuits in the brain that assemble the image. Because in your brain, you have circuits for color, shape, motion, and texture. That is known. They got to work together to build the image. And there's something wrong with the binding together process, which scientists still don't know how it works. And for some odd reason, finding just the right pale colored glasses helps to stabilize it. How they work, no one has any idea. It's all happening back here in the visual cortex. But you're talking about something very simple. I had one student come back with some pink glasses, and she said she got an A on her economics quiz because the PowerPoint slides were no longer shaking and she could read them. And then one mom had a little autistic kid that could tolerate maybe 5 minutes at the local supermarket, and after she got some little pink glasses, she could do an hour of shopping. Now, I want to emphasize it's not always pink. Sometimes it's light purple or yellow or light orange. You have to pick out the color that works for the student. And the only advantage to the Irlen lenses is you can get the perfect exact color, where at the local sunglass store you might only get the approximate color. That just shows some of my books, and we got lots of time to do questions, and they've got a mic there and a mic there. And I always like to have time to do lots of questions because it gets kind of boring to always be, talking about the same stuff all the time.
If you have a question for Dr. Grandin, make your way to one of the mics. There's 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs, and she'll try to rotate between them so that you get a chance.
Yeah, I'll do that, okay?
Good.
You talked about having a teacher that helped you. Did you have a parent that helped you?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. And this gets back to the whole thing of early intervention. My mother got me into a really good early intervention program. And Mother, when I was a little kid, was fighting for me to keep me out of an institution because when I was 3 years old, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism. I had no speech, sit and rock, constant tantrums, and Mother took me into a neurologist in Boston Children's Hospital, Bronson Crothers. She referred my mother out to a little speech therapy nursery school. They did a lot of structured teaching, similar to what they do now. And then when I was 3, she hired a live-in nanny that just played constant turn-taking games with me and my sister. She was the one that really pushed me when I was young. Then when I got into high school and college, then it kind of, other different people started really helping me. And then when I got out in the industry, there was a contractor named Jim Uhl that seeked me out to have me design projects. No, but I would have ended up in the institution if Mother hadn't been really fighting for me. But fortunately, she got some very good referrals when I was very young.
I've been interested in humane slaughter all my life. Will there ever be a time when there's humane slaughter?
Yes. I've done a lot of work on fixing the meat plants. And 10 years ago, I worked with McDonald's on auditing meat plants using a very simple scoring system that I developed where you count how many vocalizations you have. In fact, to pass a McDonald's audit, only 3 cattle out of 100 can moo going up into the stunning area. No more than 1 animal falling. And you got to get 95% on the first shot. The plants are really different than what they used to be. Now, of course, a lot of the activist groups just put up all the bad stuff. But they're having a harder time finding some of the bad stuff now. And so that veal plant, that was one last year, was really bad. I can assure you McDonald's doesn't buy baby calf meat. And that's what that plant was processing. So it was sort of outside the audits from the companies like McDonald's.
Kosher slaughter?
Well, that's a nice controversial question. I've done a lot of work with kosher slaughter. I did a lot of work in the 80s and the early 90s. And one of the worst things was the way they were restraining the animals. They were hanging the cattle upside down by one ankle. Your vocalization score, I can assure you, was 100%. You could hear these cattle screaming in the cafeteria, screaming in the office, with this big nosebleed in their nose and have to yank their nose off. It was just hideous. And there was equipment available, you know, for holding the animal in a restraining chute. I've done a lot of work on designing the restraining chutes. And the thing that I found, if you've got a system to hold the animal in a nice manner, in other words, get rid of this horrible method of restraint, which is legal, unfortunately, in this country. Canada, you're not allowed to do that. Europe, you're not allowed to do that. That if the rabbi did the cut absolutely correctly with the big long knife, the cow didn't appear to feel it. Like if I take my hands like this, let's say this mic was an animal's nose, and I did that right in front of his face like that, the cow would throw a great big fit and start jumping around. Just, you know, if I just did this, well, they may have a much smaller reaction to the cut than they do to me putting my hands like that into their face. And so the biggest problem is how you're holding that animal. Now, you can also have some, you know, if you use the wrong kind of knife, it can be really bad. You've got to use that special long knife that they have for kosher. All I can say is that when I could improve it a whole lot.
I have a question with regard to groups like Autism Speaks that try to portray Asperger's and autism as these tragic misfortunes, and so they're trying to say it's a curse to be cured. And how are groups like that impacting advocacy for neurodiversity and for trying to give people with Asperger's who consider it to be, in some cases, more helpful than harmful? How do groups like Autism Speaks impact or harm those efforts to promote diversity?
You see, the problem you have in autism is it's such a big spectrum. And a lot of the parents that are in a group like Autism Speaks have very severe children, very severe problems. And it's like a little bit of autism, genetics, and the genetics is complicated. It's little tiny code variations, and it's an additive, it's continuous. And a little bit of autism can give you a brilliant scientist or somebody who can make a real contribution to society. You get very, very severe autism, really severe ones. They got epilepsy on top of autism, and they're not going to be doing, you know, programming computers. Then you have a few people that are nonverbal, like Tito Mukapatahe, who can type independently on a computer, who's got a normal mind, but he's living in a jumble. His visual system doesn't work right, and it's giving distorted information. His hearing's actually fading in and out. He's written a book called How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? I try to, you know, I'm a total non-political person, so I try to avoid all the politics. But it's, I can understand where those parents are coming from, because these are the ones where the kids are so severe that you can't do any family activities together. And they oftentimes have a lot of other medical problems in addition to just being autistic.
Yeah, and my question was basically, how do we respond to them, to groups that basically try to lump even the high-functioning people, like me with Asperger's, into the same group as the severe, and say that
I don't agree with them on that. One of the things we need to do is to go out there and show them all the good stuff we can do.
Fair enough.
That's what we need to do. And the other thing I want to remind them is they wouldn't even have that computer or any of those other gadgets if it wasn't for the Asperger mind, because the Asperger mind invents all that electronic stuff.
I go to Rockford High School, and 2 days a week I get to go out to a job site and do some work for an hour at an office, and then the other 3 days of the week I stay at the high school and I get to help clean the lunchroom, and then I go back to we have 2 autism classes. We have the lower functioning and we have the higher functioning, and then I go back with the higher functioning kids to their classroom and learn stuff I've known since like the 3rd grade, stuff like personal hygiene and how to dress, how to behave. You don't tell someone that their breath stinks. You know, stuff like that. And it's like, can't you give me something else to do, something challenging, something that fits my level of intelligence? I already know this stuff. Teach me something I can use in a job.
Well, this is one of the problems we have with the people, preparing people for work. They're not differentiating between the real high-level stuff and the lower-level stuff. I just wanted to put the slide back up here about the different kinds of thinking, and often get asked, how do you tell what kind of a thinker a person is? Well, the visual thinkers usually will draw. They'll just be drawn towards art. I mean, the kids in 3rd or 4th grade, he's drawing beautiful drawings on his school books, papers. The pattern thinkers will be good in math when they're young. There's some real problems with how they're doing and preparing for employment. You've got to find something that you can be good at, and I think it's very important to people need to be taken out and shown all kinds of interesting things. One time I was in Kansas, and this mom said to me, well, there's nothing interesting in Kansas. And I go, well, there's cattle feed yards. Where do you think I started? There's lots and lots of interesting things. And, okay, I want to ask you, you went away from the mic. What are you good at? I'll repeat it. What are you good at?
I'm good at
drawing. You're good at drawing and computer art. Yeah, well, why don't you set up a web page and start, freelancing? That's what you need to do. Well, you do have to have a computer that works to do that. Well, what I basically did in my business is I found a niche that nobody else was in, designing livestock facilities. And I made myself really good at it. And this brings up another thing is, I had to do a lot of practice. I spent 3 years going around every feed yard in Texas and Arizona, every single one in Arizona and quite a few in Texas, working cattle in all these different facilities to see how the different facilities differed. Because again, I'm bottom-up thinking to see, what worked on this facility, what worked on that facility. And that took a long period of time. Ability has to be developed. I didn't learn what I did overnight. I also read everything I could find out about it. And what you need to do is find something, a good niche, I think, for, maybe for someone who's a web designer is just making websites for local businesses. But the first thing you've got to do is make a portfolio, because I sold my work and not myself. Now you can put your portfolio on your phone. So you have, I always carried around a portfolio of my pictures of my jobs to show to people. Well, I don't need to do that now. Now you can put all that stuff on a phone. Okay, over there.
My name is Ava, and I wanted to know, in your movie, why did that machine, which the cows went in, when you made that for yourself, why did it calm you down?
Well, some people on the spectrum, and it isn't just in autism, deep pressure over large areas of the body is calming. Because they actually have a padded machine like that they used to put Mustangs in when they have to trim their feet, wild Mustangs, and it squeezes them in 6 inches thick of foam rubber, and they come out fairly calm afterwards. And the thing is, deep pressure works for some individuals and not for others. Like if you're working with little kids, try maybe getting them in between 2 beanbag chairs or 2 sofa cushions, and try some of your speech therapy and some of your other therapy right while you're doing the pressure. Sometimes that really, really helps to calm the person down. Others it doesn't work. But just remember, it's 20 minutes on, and then you take it off for a while.
That's interesting. I like watching your movie.
Okay, well, great. We'll go on.
Dr. Grandin. I have a question from one of our remote webcast sites, this one in St. Joseph, Michigan. This person asks, why do you think creativity is more sensory-based than language-based?
There is some creativity that definitely is language-based. There's creative writing where it's creativity with language. I think you can have creativity in both modalities. But all I was saying is that things like the visual thinking and the mathematical thinking, that tends to be sort of hidden underneath the language. Okay, there was another question here that somebody wrote in from the website. While many people market their talents and ability, you seem to sell disabilities. I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. I think we'll skip that. Okay.
I wondered if in your work with various spectrumites, if you have any insight into a special challenge for spectrumites who are verbal logic thinkers, because visual and scientific mathematical thinkers still have to communicate with other people, but verbal logic thinkers have to use their talents by communicating with people. When I was in high school, my verbal skills tested off the charts, but I was totally incapable of communicating effectively with another human being. I wanted to be a scientific genius who never had to work with people, ever.
So what are you doing now?
I'm a Catholic priest.
Okay. Okay, well, that uses verbal thinking.
God has a twisted sense of humor.
Okay, okay. Well, one thing I said before, I think we got to, when kids get into middle school, you need to be thinking a lot more about what this kid could be when he grows up. You also have got to expose kids to a lot of different occupations. If I hadn't gone out to my aunt's ranch, I wouldn't have gotten interested in the cattle handling. You know, you got to expose them to interesting stuff. You know, I was in the movie, they showed film clip from the original Bell Labs movie I saw that got me interested in the optical illusion room. If it hadn't been shown that, I wouldn't have gotten interested in it. You know, you found something that works well for you. I'm finding going out on the job market that the verbal type thinkers seem to be the hardest ones finding employment. The artistic thinker, the ones that are good at art, that's a lot easier to market because you can make a portfolio. See, because when you're awkward in socializing with people, I found I had to show my work rather than myself. You know, so I'd get in with a client and immediately I had all the pictures and drawings out and was showing them. And I also had made a really nice brochure to show off my work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, my voice is big. Well, you know how you're, like, afraid of those sliding doors? You think they're guillotines?
No, the problem with the sliding doors was rapid movement.
Ah, okay.
You know, for some people on the spectrum, rapid movement is attractive in a way, but like if somebody's like, a lady was fanning herself one time down in the front row, and that's so distracting I couldn't screen it out. No, I didn't think, no, it was rapid movement that causes the problem.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid of the dark, kinda, because I'm afraid of what could hide in it. And I'm kind of really into horror books and stuff like that. And
well, if you're afraid of the dark, I mean, those things are just gonna, those movies are just gonna give you more stuff to be afraid of.
And I heard you talking about, like, how some things will calm people down. I think what calms me down is video games.
Well, let me tell you, one problem thing I'm seeing with video games is I'm seeing kids get so addicted to video games that they don't do anything else. Now, there's some kids that can get into video games and they can learn how to program them or learn how to do the artwork for them. Now, if video games had been around when I was in high school, I would have gotten addicted to video games and I wouldn't have been taking care of the horses and doing livestock stuff. And I can't do programming. I took a programming course, but I couldn't do it. And it's fine to play a little bit of video games, but an hour a day is all the video games you should be playing. Because being a beta tester for a video game company, that's not a viable job option. Don't even think about that. It's fine to play it. I'm not saying don't play them. Hour a day. You know, it's just like too much chocolate cake's bad for you too. Then say you have to totally give it up.
I think we have time for one more.
Okay, let's take her right up there.
Do you think any mind is actually normal?
That's a really good question, and I have thought about that a whole lot. What would the perfectly normal person be like? What would a normal brain be exactly like? I don't think anything like that really exists. You know, I think he might be very boring. You know, everything's a continuum. You know, you have someone that has bipolar. When does moody become bipolar? You know, when does feeling blue become depression? There's no black and white dividing line. When does being a techie but not very social become Asperger's? There's no black and white dividing line. There's also, the other thing I get worried about with these labels is a lot of you verbal thinkers out there can't see past the label. And a kid's labeled Asperger's and there's not enough expectations for working and doing things. I've seen situations where you've got a 12-year-old that doesn't know how to order food in a restaurant because the parents never made them do it. You know, they've got to, learn those kind of things. There's a big range of minds, yes, and then there's certainly things that are definitely abnormal, like lack of speech till nearly age 4. Yeah, that's definitely abnormal. Okay, I'll take one more quick one right there.
I'm gonna have to wait a while because I have quite a few things to say. So how about take him over there?
Wait a minute, you're talking really fast. I can't.
My apologies.
All right, okay, right there. Sorry, I couldn't hear what he said. Okay, let the boy feed.
I was just gonna say, I find it really sort of weird, like, it doesn't always happen with me, but I mean, just to say, none of that would be me, all that. For example, one thing might seem like, oh yeah, there's about 200 other things on the list. Looks like this thing's pretty much nothing. It's on number 167. When really you don't realize, somehow, you don't realize that one may be an opening to another, which would open to 2 more.
I don't understand what you're trying to ask me.
Well, I mean, how things that seem like it's simple, I mean, they seem so simple.
Okay.
Maybe something on the radio to one person might be this huge coincidence to another. Like maybe on the movie Bedtime Stories. Remember on one of the stories it was about fire. He turned on the radio, there was one song about fire. Switched on next, and there was another one, and another one, and another one.
Well, one thing I had to learn, there's an awful lot of information out there, and I've had people say, well, how do you take all this information, all the stuff you read, and figure out sort of what the bottom line is? When I was in college, I used to call that finding the basic principle. And, reading a lot of stuff helped, and then I could take the things I'd read and put them into different categories, put them into subcategories. I think I'll just finish up and say that one of the things I found very interesting is my mind works exactly like a search engine, the verbal search engine works. You type in a keyword, then it gradually gets off the subject, just the way my mind does. It's associative. And when search engines first came out, well, the first ones that came out were terrible. But then when the good ones like Google came out, I'm going, wow, this is exactly like how my mind works. I think, well, who do you think's designing these things after all? A lot of autism genetics designing this stuff. I think we'll just end on that. If you didn't have some autistic genetics, we would still be living in caves because, after all, the social people wouldn't make the first stone spear. Okay.
Dr. Grandin will be in the lobby west of the auditorium behind us here for about 20 minutes. So she won't have time for stories, but maybe she can meet some of you and sign some books.